Ready? Well, hello, Washington, D.C., and hello, Berlin, and of course, Cairo and Beirut. This is Raghida Dergham for the fourth e-policy circle of Beirut Institute Summit in Abu Dhabi. And we have 1 hour of a great conversation. We have with us today, of course, you know who they are. I'm just going to say their excellencies, David Schenker, we have Hossam Zaki, and we have Philipp Ackermann, and of course, from Beirut, we have Ghassan Hasbani. Welcome, and we will go into the usual of 4 minutes each person, maximum, preferably 3, and then we will get into a conversation that is rather global, as was always is the case with Beirut Institute Summit, e-policy circle. Welcome, welcome, welcome. With David Schenker, because it is Washington, D.C., and we want to know all you're doing there. 4 minutes to you, David.
Thanks, Raghida. You know, I didn't know what you wanted to talk about today, so I'm going to talk just globally throughout the Middle East. And we're dealing with obviously unprecedented time and challenges throughout the region. And it's not surprising different states are handling it differently. One thing that is, I think, pervades the region is horrific unemployment and humanitarian suffering. But what occurs to me is, regardless of the pace at which states emerge from the COVID and reopen, there will be repercussions from populations based on how the states managed the COVID and how they manage the emergence from the virus. And so this is something that I'll be looking at and interested in following as we go forward. The states clearly that are going to be affected the most are the ones that are involved in these wars, whether it be Yemen, Libya, or Syria, but also other states with domestic strife. And so we are providing support to those states, but just analytically, you know, one wonders what the outcomes are going to be for these states, whether they're going to muddle through, whether they're going to be able to get out and see the other side of this. And so I really don't have anything profound to say on this topic, but I'm happy to be with you today and happy to engage broadly on any issue you want to talk about.
All right. Well, thank you, David. But, you know, since I am sitting in Beirut, I need to start out by following up quickly about Lebanon. So how do you in Washington view what's happening to us in Lebanon here? And because everything rotates around whatever it is that is mentioned in DC, whether it's sanctions, additional sanctions on Lebanese people, individuals close to Hezbollah, whether you're going to see sanctions on Hezbollah, like Walid Jumblat called on you last week through this e-policy circle. He said, you're using the Lebanese as a collateral damage for your policy of sanctions against Hezbollah. Let me start with that because I want to do this follow-up with you, and then I'll take it into the larger discussion. So where are we on your radar?
Well, Raghida, you know, Walid is one of my favorite people. He's a very smart man, but I think he's wrong about this topic. You know, Lebanon had like a triple, well, let's say a B- from Moody's and all the credit rating agencies. And it went to a triple C even before the United States sanctioned Amal Trust Bank. Lebanon's economy is in crisis because Lebanese government has for years mismanaged the Lebanese economy. There's endemic corruption, and they did not follow, I think, policies that any state should follow. You cannot, for example, have a peg at 1,500 and spend $3 billion a year in providing people with interest on their Lebanese lira bank accounts and expect that's going to turn out well.
So we're going to have a larger discussion on this later, but you disagree that your sanctions against Hezbollah are, sort of sacrificing Lebanon as a country as collateral damage?
Absolutely disagree. In fact, what I would say is our sanctions actually help Lebanon. because Lebanon has been known for money laundering. It has been known for a banking system that doesn't have transparency, illicit finance, money laundering, etc. Hezbollah has exploited that system and undermined confidence in the system. And steps that were taken to root out these accounts, I think, were good for the state and help build some element and confidence in a system that was widely viewed as corrupt. So yeah, I think it was a good thing.
All right, let me move on to Hossam Zaki. Please take your 4 minutes. You put to the table whatever you wish to, then we will discuss. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Raghida. Hello to everybody. I think in a wrap up for 4 minutes, difficult to wrap all the events in the region, but let me try to do that very, very quickly. From an Arab perspective, the situation in the region is alarming, of course. Why? Because we have humongous security challenges, including the ones coming from terrorism. We have an ongoing tour where you have points of crisis that have not been resolved, a variety of interference by non-Arab countries in Arab affairs. We have a very, very difficult, unfortunate, call it what you want, economic situation, setbacks, aggravated by this pandemic. So in the aftermath of the Corona situation, we're going to have to face some very difficult truth in many of our countries. And we have, of course, anti-government popular movements and unrest even in also many of the countries. So in order to get to specifics, I start always with Palestine. And I'm sad to say that it remains an open wound with the issue of the annexation intended by the Israeli government. I think this is going to make matters worse. It's bad for the stability of the region. It's bad for peace in the region. And I think any complacency by the international community is going to backfire on our stability in this region. I remind everybody that Palestine is a powder keg that is about to explode and ready to explode in any given moment, especially when you don't expect it to. Syria, also, unfortunately, a country that was transformed from a player to a playground. And it's really approaching a moment of truth in 2021 because of the intended elections, presidential elections. We are witnessing tensions there within the regime and between the regime and Russia, and the Iranians are getting lots of hits, and it's not going anywhere good. It has lost its sovereignty, and its territorial integrity is really under pressure. Libya is in tatters. We can talk about that if you want, because it's a very situation. Yemen too. Now, we have also two situations in Lebanon and Iraq that are really very, very uncomfortable, to say the least. So in a wrap up, I think we are very concerned about the proliferation of regional players and their role in Arab affairs. We are worried about the consequences of the annexation. We need stronger international in Libya, and we are ready to play a part in Syria if the trio of Astana is to let us do that.
Okay, very interesting. So you have offered as the Arab League to play a role in Syria, and you said to the Astana partners, which we're talking about Turkey, Iran, and Russia. You said to them, please allow us to play a role in Syria. What do you mean?
No, it doesn't go like that. Let me tell you how it goes. It goes because we have a dialogue really with Russia. And the Russians have always been forthcoming in this. Forthcoming in the sense that they are keen and ready, and they told us that they want the Arab participation in the future of Syria. They do not want, so they claim, they do not want their trio to be the only one guiding the future of Syria. So we expect this attitude, and they are willing to oblige. But of course, they have partners, and it's not going to be easy.
Right. So, okay, we'll go into that. How much is Russia and Turkey on the same page or Russia and Iran on the same page, and as far as an Arab role in Syria and a bit later. Let me go to Philipp Ackermann. Philipp, you have 4 minutes, please. You're muted yourself, Philipp. Please do not mute yourself.
No,
Okay.
you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Raghida. I appreciate the invitation. Let me start by saying it's very difficult to in 4 minutes, go across all the problems. We are very worried, and we are seeing whether COVID is really aggravating the problems, which I think there can be made an argument for that, or whether it facilitates, which is apparently less the case. But I think what we see in all these conflicts, the longer they last, the more they become internationalized somehow. And we see that in Syria very clearly. Hossam alluded to it. We see it in Yemen. And I would like to focus, if I may, on one conflict, namely the Libya conflict, which is very, very close very in the center of our agenda because of the Berlin process, as you know. And I think what we see is in Libya as well, this conflict is less and less about Libya. It has become a proxy conflict with shifting objectives and parties. And I think what we see in Libya is a sort of an Astanization of conflicts. I think what does it mean and what can we do? I think the first layer in Libya is the internal conflict, and it's a conflict which is essentially about who gets what, I would say, and how to set up a new state in a country without a great tradition of institutions. We see that neighboring countries like Egypt or Tunisia and Algeria have very strong institutions. Libya never had strong institutions, and it's about getting all the tribes, all the people of Libya together. I think this is complicated enough, but essentially feasible. But there is a second layer of this conflict, and that's starting to be external. That's about political Islam. What do we do about the Muslim Brotherhood? Is it part of the political spectrum, or is it a terrorist organization? It's not about revenge, it's about survival, maybe, and not only political. I think the sponsors of the conflict parties fall in either one or the other camp, let's say. And the third layer of this conflict is even more external. That's the conflict about spheres of influence. The Turkey and Russia and the Sunni Arab Gulf states try to compete in a new great game, I would say, about regional and global influence. This is something which is new to the 21st century, I would say. It shows also that the old or the former system of order is dissolving. So this is about distribution, it's about ideology, and it's about influence. And this is sort of the setup we are confronting each other with. And I think as it is a direct challenge to Europe in its southern neighborhood, the Europeans have to try to find a way how to manage it in the right way. So we did the Berlin process, which was, I think, internationally quite a success. Unfortunately, on the ground, the commitment of Berlin has not been met so far. The idea of the strengthening of the rules-based order without being naive is not really reflected in what we see on the ground. Have we failed? I would say no so far. The playbook is there. We try to work on how to promote it, but at the end of the day, there is still a lot of work to do, and it is tedious. It's the best that we have, but we need every partner who was around this table to really abide by its commitments.
All right, Philipp, I definitely am going to go into many details of Libya, but I mean, I don't think your use of the word Estanization is what you meant, because that would have meant Iran, Turkey, and Russia playing in Libya. To my knowledge, not Iran, unless you are
No. Let me get that straight. Astanization doesn't mean that the partners of Astana are there, but we have a sort of a group of external players who basically decide what to do in Libya. I don't see it as far as it is in Syria, where all the enemies are trying to sit around the table. But I think we are on the way of this Astanization in Libya, right, with other partners, with other actors here.
I will definitely want everyone to discuss a bit later whether the relationship between Turkey and Russia, which has gone sour in Syria, over Idlib, has spilled over into Libya, and therefore it's become the new playground for this battle between Ankara and Moscow. But first, I want to go to Ghassan Hasbani, And please, the floor is yours for 4 minutes, kindly.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to be on this distinguished panel. Look, just on a regional perspective, yes, we're facing multiple crises that have actually resulted from decades of socio-economic and political pressures being exerted on all of these countries. More specifically, we're talking about the countries that were most influenced by here in Lebanon, more neighboring countries such as Syria and the regional conflicts that we've been facing. We have multiple actors in Syria, and we're still looking for an outcome that will be quite influential on the rest of the region. Definitely US, Russia positions with actors such as Turkey and Iran. And the question is, what will the role of Iran be in Syria? This also will determine many other outcomes in the neighboring countries, particularly in Lebanon. Further sanctions on Syria also are creating an outflow of goods and value estimated in the region of $4 billion right now from Lebanon to Syria, a value in the economy which is badly needed. So when we say that sanctions may not be affecting or impacting Lebanon, in many ways, indirectly, they are, and we need to address these impacts in many ways that we have to think about. Also, sanctions internally. We're facing internal issues on Hezbollah. These sanctions are quite taxing, no doubt. They, as David has said, they have actually, in many ways, produced more transparency in the banking system. But combined with the economic crisis that we're facing, and combined with the impact of overspending and corruption over many years in public sector in Lebanon, they're creating the perfect storm right now. Not because the sanctions are directly impacting the economy of Lebanon, but because of the reaction to the sanctions, utilizing the banking sector of Lebanon, the free market economy of Lebanon, to try to drive Lebanon into a less liberal economy and to raise questions about the very fabric and makeup of the country constitutionally, which is quite dangerous at this point in time. There's more deeper the economic situation that we're facing that is, again, as I said, raising these questions today, and following the COVID-19 crisis and pandemic, it's getting more spelled out, calling for further help from the international community. So this is where the balance needs to be struck between the international community being concerned about Hezbollah in Lebanon, being focused on sanctions, and at the same time looking at ways to support the Lebanese economy. And to close this whole loop is a government, a newly formed government that is supposed to be independent, supposed to be technically working on financial and economic solutions, yet it is incapable of proper decision-making because of the political influences around it and from those who have actually formed it. And this is creating also challenges at the start today of the discussions with the IMF.
Ghassan, Hasbani, I lost you a little bit. Are you calling for lifting sanctions, American sanctions on Hezbollah, or are you calling for strengthening them? I lost you a little bit. Is the government...
You couldn't have lost me there, of course not. This is not what I'm talking about. This is the sanctions are effectively the business of the United States. This is how they decide to conduct their foreign policy. What we need to do now today is to avoid Lebanon being stuck or the banking sector of Lebanon being... Pardon?
What are you saying should be done? Should the IMF deliver just without any conditions? Or
no,
should...
what we're looking for today is starting from the Lebanese government to start taking concrete steps in the reforms, because that's the first pillar of requirements, true reforms, actionable reforms, not paper-based reforms, not simply legislative reforms on paper in new laws that never get implemented, but to start taking steps today, and for the IMF and the international community to view this in light of proper reforms and keep a close eye on that, supporting Lebanon, supporting the Lebanese economy and the banking sector, at least to be able to withstand all the pressures that I had mentioned earlier. As far as the sanctions on Hezbollah are concerned, this is not something that the Lebanese can do much about, or I can influence in my opinion, except that we just need to make sure that Lebanon and the economy of Lebanon, the banking sector of Lebanon, doesn't get used as a retaliation tool against these sanctions.
Thank you very much. David Schenker, let me ask you about two laws that have become sort of a household item amongst the Lebanese. They talk about the Caesar Law and the Magnitsky Act. So that if we're talking about the Caesar Law, we're talking about Syria and the impact on Lebanon when this law kicks off. I think it's going to be early June. So how much is Lebanon going to be impacted or affected by the application of the Caesar Law, and what does it mean to Syria? And I ask about two together because, as you know, Hezbollah and others are saying we need to open up and have open exchange across the borders with Syria. Tell us where your government is taking this act and how does it impact both Syria and Lebanon, please. David Schenker.
So I think people will be impacted that have aided and abetted the murder of nearly 500,000 Syrian people. So if you have been trucking with the Assad regime and helping to perpetrate these massacres, or facilitating it or aiding and abetting the regime, then I think there's a good chance you might be targeted by the Caesar Act. And but these are largely individuals.
Individuals, Lebanese or Syrian, or it doesn't matter what nationality?
It doesn't matter what nationality.
Okay, so then what are you going to do if Lebanon opens its borders or continues the smuggling through the borders? Is there something that you're going to do when you start to implement the Caesar Act?
Well, listen, as part of the Lebanese government reforms,
no, not reforms.
They will have to raise revenues. They will have to secure their borders so they can actually start charging duty and revenue. Now, Nasrallah has said that's a non-starter. So is the government going to be dictated to by Nasrallah? I don't know. That's going to be on the Lebanese to implement that, right? I'm not going to secure their border for them.
All right. So then let me take you to the Magnitsky Act, because that's another act that everybody is talking about, because you have been going back and forth speaking about the possibility of, at least not officially, but leaking, that there are going to be individuals targeted, Lebanese officials included, close to both Hezbollah and to the president, even close to him, not him himself, and to Gibran Bassil, his brother-in-law and former foreign minister. This is being talked a lot about. Jeffrey Feltman last week, he said something to the effect that this has been a profound mystery why you haven't imposed sanctions on Gibran Bassil, and that he should be an obvious target. Do you differ with Jeffrey Feltman, or do you think you have...
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about particular individuals. What I would say is it is dismaying how long it's taking to roll out these sanctions and designations, whether it's Magnitsky Act or aiding and abetting Hezbollah, terrorist supporters, human rights abusers, etc. They have taken a long time. I think COVID has slowed down things as well with the Department of Treasury. I don't have anything to say about it. It's, if it was up to me, there would be sanctions.
Well, but why isn't it up to you? But aren't you the Assistant Secretary of State?
Yeah, I'm not the Assistant. Excuse me. I'm not the Assistant Secretary. I'm not the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury Department.
All right. So you're saying that it's really not in the State Department; it's in the Treasury Department. It is
well,
not.
I mean, they're the ones who make these designations for the type of sanctions. So there's different types of sanctions and different types of authorities, but they're responsible for a number of them.
Right. Again, I'm not clear on whether you're saying there would be sanctions or will not be. Can you clarify that?
I've said it since day one. There will be. I hope they will be soon.
All right. Let me go to Philipp Ackermann. You have taken a very interesting step against Hezbollah. It was something very strange and unexpected for Germany, who's on very close relationship or has been with Iran. Why have you taken this step? I mean, I know the background, but I'm talking about the larger picture. Has this hurt your relationship with Iran? What happened since you designated Hezbollah as your word terrorist group? What drove you to do that?
Let me clarify, Raghida. We didn't declare Hezbollah a terrorist group. That is done already a long time. No, what we did, the step we took was to forbid activities of Hezbollah in Germany, so that Hezbollah cannot work as an association, as a fundraising organization through some mosques or something in Germany. That we forbade. It has to be said that Hezbollah was not very active in Germany, but we felt that in the last events in Syria, when we saw what happened in Yemen, but also Lebanon proper, we felt that it was clear and it was time to make this point, namely that Hezbollah is not a constructive actor, it's a destructive actor in the region, and therefore we felt that they should not be allowed to work in Germany. Now, also, this is very important to me, we have a good relation, or relatively good relation with Iran too, but it's of course a very complicated one, It's not, we wouldn't consider Iran a friend or something, you know, it's a relation that is diplomatic, long-standing, we have regular exchange, but we differ on very, very many things with Iran, on very many things. And Hezbollah is one of the, interesting enough, I think, when we made this statement, Hassan Nasrallah was rather modest in his reaction. Only Iran was not modest in his reaction. So that I mean, the Iranians were really fighting and very, very really upset about it. And that shows in how far Iran is really behind Hezbollah, and therefore I think it is justified the step we took. It is Hezbollah is I would say like a proxy of Iran in Lebanon, and is therefore a very difficult partner to deal with. And for Lebanon, it is it's not a very let's say it's a very difficult partner in the Lebanese political spectrum. As big and as decisive it may be, we feel it's not so far really a very constructive partner.
Are you lobbying, or are you in discussions with other European countries, so that in particular France, for example, to take similar steps like yours in Germany?
Of course, we discussed it with many European partners. Some were asking us, some were surprised, some were critical about it. I don't foresee a huge wave of imitation, let's say. I don't see that many other countries will follow this step. And the French have maybe a little different approach to things. But of course, it is a constant item of discussion within the European Union.
This question is actually for all of you, but I will address it first to Hossam Zaki. It is about the Israeli annexation of West Bank. The Iranians are saying, well, that should really make Lebanon, or at least my sources tell me, some in the Revolutionary Guards are saying, well, this legitimizes making Lebanon the springboard for revenge from Israel because of the policy of annexation. First of all, Hossam Zaki, do you think that as an Arab League, do you think this should be, something should be done by you so that Lebanon is not the proxy for this and doesn't pay the price alone? And the question goes to David Schenker. Why, I mean, is there a way, you were, I think, with the Secretary of State in Israel when we don't know what you did there, but you may want to tell us. Are you urging the Israelis to step back from this annexation timetable only, or from the crux of taking the steps of annexation? Whoever wants to go first. Hossam?
Okay, thank you. Listen, I tell you something. We all understand by now that Hezbollah's rhetoric about Israel-Palestine has severe limitations, and it has been undermined severely in its credibility. And I don't think that for any good reason, annexation or not, at this moment, they are ready to lift a finger in order to get themselves into this Israel-Palestine conflict anytime soon, even if it has the potential of helping them as the situation inside Lebanon gets darker and more difficult. But what I want to say is not about Hezbollah, which is totally undermining its credibility for me, for us really. It's about the annexation. And I think, and I repeat what I said earlier, the annexation has the potential of throwing this region into instability. And again, for all the people who are watching from either Washington or elsewhere, when they watch the region, and sometimes they say, but people have not come out in the streets in support of Palestine. This is a sign that the Palestinian cause has lost its grip on public opinion. That is wrong. The Palestinian cause is still there. The Palestinian problem is still there. And I think that underestimating this is a huge mistake.
Yeah, but the question, if Iran takes the lead for revenge for the annexation in Lebanon, that's the question. Limit yourself kindly, like to 30 seconds. Is this?
Iran is not going to do that. Iran has all sorts of problems, and it's not going to do that. It is insane if they think that they can do that. They will serve rhetoric. It's their job. They do that all the time. And Hezbollah the same. But that's it. They're not going to go beyond that.
All right. Go ahead, David Schenker, because you want to I would like to hear from you as to what you guys did in Israel when, we were told, I don't know if it's correct, is that you did discuss the potential postponement of the activation of the annexation decision. Is this all you did, or did you urge for something? If you did that, or did you urge for something?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the nature of diplomatic conversations. When I tell you that we spent a couple hours with the Prime Minister, with Minister of Defense Gans, with Gabi Ashkenazi, generally, we went there, talked about Iran, we talked about China, the COVID virus. We talked about the lack of transparency of China, the danger of doing business with them. We talked about a broad range of other topics.
You did not talk about the annexation? You did not?
There was some discussion of it, but I'm not going to talk about exactly.
All right, don't talk about, okay, I understand.
I can tell you that, we continue to discuss this with the Israelis. I understand the White House is in close contact with both the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister and the Minister of Defense. There's a number of decisions that Israel has to take, what it intends to do, its timelines, and those discussions are now taking place.
But you embrace the decision still. I mean, this is a decision for the administration that you gave the green light for the Israelis to go ahead, no matter what, with the annexation.
So you saw the president said when they rolled out the vision for peace that there are territories that would be Israel, and there are territories that would be the Palestinian state. And the president said that, I don't want to, paraphrase him, but I don't have the quote in front of me, but he said that Israel was able to do certain things with these territories that would be the future, that would not be part of the future Palestinian state.
30 seconds on this issue from Ghassan Hasbani, using Lebanon as a springboard for revenge of Israel's annexation policies, embraced, as it seems, to a great extent by the US.
Look, as this, it really depends on what the US intends to plan for the region, but I believe that any action today will serve to destabilize further the region. And there are groups in the region who are waiting for destabilization to refloat themselves among their people and among their local and regional supporters to find a cause and a purpose given the sanctions that are being placed. So any action right now at that level or any other level would simply serve to reignite purpose and probably flow against the sanctions.
I think David Schenker wants to say something.
Yeah, no, I'd ask Ghassan whether he believes that the Iranian movement of missiles into Syria and into Lebanon is also destabilizing the region.
Indeed, the movement of weapons is destabilizing the region. The question is whether this is going to be continued given the recent events that are taking place, given the sanctions, given the tighter controls that are taking place. So the question is, as I said, yes, any movement from any part will destabilize the region. And, this is why, again, I said, whenever there's a movement from the other side, some people will find those movements to be further justified again, and they will regain focus. Today, I think we are getting somewhere with what's happening. The question is, what will be the purpose, the end purpose of the sanctions? Any sanctions, any blockade has a purpose in the end, either to go to the negotiation table or to be ended by a surrender of some kind. So
right.
Where are we going with that?
So go ahead, David. Do you want to answer that?
Well, I'm not sure what the question was. I mean, there are sanctions against Hezbollah because there's a terrorist organization.
Go ahead, say it again. We did not hear.
There are sanctions against Hezbollah because it is a terrorist organization, right? There are some in the Congress or in the Senate saying that they should sanction the entire country because Hezbollah is part of the government. There are some people that are saying that.
And how's that going? So where is that? Is there a movement towards sanctioning the whole country as a result to
well, certainly the piece of legislation that Ted Cruz has now that talks about no provision of U.S. assistance or IMF loans or anything like that because of the nature of the Lebanese government. I'm not sure that's going to have enough votes on the Hill.
Philipp Ackermann, you think Lebanon should be sanctioned altogether because of Hezbollah?
I think one should be very careful with sanctions. I think we've seen too much of sanctions all around. I think that sanctions is too much of a used tool for diplomacy. So I'm not sure whether that would be helpful to get Lebanon on a better track. But can I say, Raghida, if you permit, because this is very important. Germany being maybe the country with the deepest relationship with Israel in Europe, we have been expressing grave concerns about annexation. We have been expressing on every level that we feel that annexation at this step would be hugely critical and hugely destructive to the region. For international law reasons, certainly, but mainly for the question, how do the neighbors and those countries who have some kind of working relations with Israel, like Jordan, like Egypt, how would that play out for them? And therefore, we have said very clearly to the Israelis, please keep in mind what the region, the adjacent countries, your neighboring countries really have to do once this annexation is, or what they might do, or what they. And I think this is something which the new Israeli government has to sit and ponder about, because it's very, very, it comes as a high, with a high price.
Can I just go one round on Iran before I indulge into the Libyan dossier, because it's very important. On Iran, David Schenker, there's a new development, which is Iran-Venezuela. It's not new in the sense of the relationship, but it is new in terms of oil for gold or gold for oil. And we know that there's been noises from Washington opposing this transfer of oil from Iran to Venezuela. And of course, we heard of lots of gold and sort of tons of that going to Iran. What is going to be, what is in the pipeline regarding that? I mean, we heard criticism. Is it going to lead to a confrontation, or there is a space of accommodation between Iran and the United States because we are in a pre-election time, election of the President of the United States?
I think we're looking at our options. Obviously, these are two pariah states that have horrific human rights abuses and that are, in the case of Iran, destabilizing its neighbors. No, obviously we're not pleased with the movement of this, the oil. One could imagine them sending other things. I mean, weapons or who knows? So I think we're looking at our options.
All right, so including military options?
Options.
All right, so you're not excluding military options, does not exclude anything at this point in the way I understand you, right?
Options.
All right.
Look at options.
All right. Talking of options, I mean, Iran has options too in the Gulf. There is some talk that in order for Iran to get, I mean, that for survival, they need to do something because the sanctions are suffocating them. And the way to do things is to create trouble in the Gulf, maritime trouble. There again, this question is to all four of you. Do you expect, Philipp Ackermann, do you expect any such thing in the Gulf? And how, what is Europe's position at this point? Because the Iranians thought that Europe will do something to ease the sanctions with the different, ways of delivering the oil sales and buying oil, and that didn't happen. So do you think that Iran is going to feel choked and do something? And what will you do about it? Then I'll just go around everybody's point of view. Philipp Ackermann.
We have seen a couple of very worrying moves by Iran in the Gulf. We have seen a couple of very unpleasant actions, which I think are disturbing and threatening and should not be pursued. We have made it clear in our context to the Iranians that we expect them to act according to international law, and that we feel that they should rather refrain from threatening other nations in the region. I feel the fact is that they haven't done a lot lately. We have seen it was very scarcely that they did something, so I'm not expecting huge activities. But what we see in Iran is, of course, that the hardliners take more and more power, that the government becomes less and less important, and the hardliners do more and more whatever they want to do. So I would not exclude that at some stage we'll have a very forceful sort of acting in the Gulf or elsewhere without the government approving it, without the government really being responsible for it. I think what we see in Iran is a shift of power away from the government to hardliner fractions, which is quite obvious, right?
Hossam, Zaki, you're expecting the same? You're expecting movement, military one, confrontation?
Well, yeah. Unfortunately, maybe military is a bit outside of my purview, but really, in political terms, we are expecting a lot of difficulties because the sanctions are going to be tightened against them, and they are feeling the heat of these sanctions. They already have playgrounds where they push their proxies in order to intervene in Arab affairs in many ways. We didn't speak enough about Yemen, I felt. Yemen is a very, very difficult situation. But they have this potential, unfortunately, it's been building up for over 35 years. Now they are using this potential. In order to take these cards away from them, it's going to be very, very difficult. But we are we have called on them to abide by good neighborliness and good principles to coexist and live together in peace in this region. But they don't listen. They tell you one thing and then they act in a different way. And what Philipp Ackermann just said reinforces this point of view, is that now we are witnessing a shift away from the current government toward those who are on the harder line that are willing to take action in the region. And unfortunately, it's going to be at the expense of Arab societies and Arab states.
Listen, I'm going to dedicate time. I'm going to take Ghassan Hasbani quickly on this issue of Iran's plans for the region in the Gulf and beyond, in as far as what he's expecting pre-elections in the United States. And then I'm going to really have to get into Libya for the last 10 minutes. Go ahead, Ghassan Hasbani.
Very quickly, I think with the sanctions building up and continuing both on Iran and its proxies and their allies, there are two options effectively left there. Either to start shifting towards a good neighbor, as Excellency Zaki said, or to start provoking action against them to, as I said earlier, to justify retaliation and counteraction which could end up either floating them further or pushing them over the edge if they can't sustain any confrontation at large scale. All this depends on the timing and the scale and the action that could be planned by those on the other side, if there is a plan for this and an intent to do that. And any action today that is uncalculated or provocative, if it is not met with the right timing and the right tools and approach, may end up further destabilizing without any end results in the foreseeable future, with a negative impact on the Arab states, including Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, etc. So all of these need to be taken into consideration as the Iranian regime gets more cornered by sanctions and gets more on the more hardline side in the administration.
Just a quick comment on what Hossam Zaki said. I wish we could get into Yemen and into the issue of Iraq, but because time is short, so we dedicate a different focus every different, it depends on the time and the policy circles, casting and what have you. But David Schenker, are you expecting trouble with Iran before the elections? And then I'm going to move immediately to Libya.
Well, there's always a risk of that. Iran is, unpredictable. All we want is for Iran to behave like a normal state. That means stopping enriching nuclear material, fissile material, stopping the development of advanced ballistic missiles, and stopping destabilizing Arab states, whether it be Iraq, Yemen, Syria, or Lebanon. There's other things that we'd like them to do. I mean, it doesn't really make sense that Iran was flying, 55 flights from China, Mahan Airlines, into the Middle East during the COVID virus, spreading it throughout the region. This is also irresponsible, but we'd settle for a couple of these things.
All right, I want to stay with David Schenker on Libya. What's going on? Why did the United States take a position critical of Russia between yesterday and today, actually, critical of Russia in Libya, where really the country which is actually creating havoc in Libya is actually Turkey? What's going on? Why?
I'm sorry, why do you think that it's Turkey that's creating the havoc by backing the internationally recognized government of the GNA while Russia is sending in mercenaries and advanced fighter aircraft?
Well, because if you listen to the countries of the region and the way they are taking the mercenaries, the teenagers, flying them or transporting them.
Yeah, everybody has mercenaries. Everybody has mercenaries, right? Wagner forces, the Russian Wagner group, which we have, the United States has designated, the Europeans haven't done so yet. I'm hoping they will someday. But they came first. They pushed Haftar into his April offensive on Tripoli with the aim of sacking the capital. It was only then that the Turks stepped in and prevented what would have been probably a horrific humanitarian catastrophe.
This is quite fascinating. This is fascinating where the US is on this issue. That's why I want to take it to both Hossam Zaki and to Philipp Ackermann. Hossam Zaki, you seem ready to get in on this. Go ahead.
Well, we equally condemn all interventions, all foreign interventions in the Libyan affairs. So we're not picking and choosing. We're not saying that the Russian intervention is fine and is not fine, and Turkish intervention is fine. We are saying to everybody, do not interfere in Libyan affairs. Now, you can say that, well, it's easier said than done, obviously, and we're following what is happening on the ground. It seems like a real conundrum. I think Turkey has gotten itself into a very difficult situation, a potential long-term problem for them. The Russians are intervening the way they have been, and this is also not a positive thing. But yes, we are witnessing some kind of a proxy situation between those two countries, an extension of what has happened in Syria, probably. But that is going to be very difficult for the rest of the region. Why? Because Libya is important. In this part of the world, it has the effect of destabilizing North Africa, south of the Saharan Africa, and Southern Europe. It is that much important. So we really want everyone to just lay off Libya, get their hands off Libya. Is this difficult to do? Well, if you are involved in this conflict and you are ideologically involved by helping certain players, well, it's going to be difficult for you to take yourself off the table. But you need to do that. The international community, represented by the Security Council, has to have a firm stand. Now, Security Council has its problems because Russia is a member there, permanent member. So it's not going to be easy at all to deal with this unless the two Libyan factions are tired of this conflict.
Well, this is easier said than I want to bring in Philipp Ackermann. Who said something now? Somebody wanted to say something? No? I'm going to Philipp Ackermann. Philipp Ackermann, I really need to hear your view of what David Schenker said. Well, it's basically, and I'm going to really fight with David Schenker over this. Well, you know, this party has their mercenaries and the other party has their mercenaries. So, you know, well, you know, it's as if it's legitimized. So Ackermann, go ahead, Philipp.
I will not, Raghida, I will not say that one of the external actors who is present in Syria is more culpable or more guilty than the other. What we see is, and we have named two, Turkey and Russia, that people bring war material, they bring mercenaries in the country, they bring now Syrians in the country, on both sides actually. Syrians fighting for Haftar and Syrians fighting for Sarraj. And this is a very, very bad development. All these parties were sitting around the Berlin table. All these parties agreed to the conclusions of Berlin. And I think what has been very obvious in the last couple of weeks, when you saw the withdrawal from the Eastern Army from the Tripolis area, is that there is no military victory in the Syria conflict. There is no military victory. Right. You have, and I think Hossam put it totally clearly and rightly, you have to withdraw all foreign military mercenaries and military devices from Syria. It has to be solved within Libya. It has to be solved within Libya and by the Libyans and helped by the international community. But military engagement on either side is not helpful.
But wait a minute, it is a military engagement all the way in Libya. What are we saying? We're pretending as if it's not. And now we have, if I hear you correctly, you all are saying there's a proxy war between Turkey and Russia on the territory of Libya. Mind you, there is a country divided over a legitimate government or not a legitimate government. Go ahead, David Schenker. You're just, I didn't hear the US before being so categorically pro the Wifaq government as such. What happened? Is it because you doubt what Russia is up to, or because you're closer to?
No, well, we want a negotiated solution here. We have always recognized legitimate government in the GNA. So this is not a new development. We are engaged in this. We are supportive of de-escalation and a negotiated solution. But one of the things, and I just wanted to echo Philipp here, in Berlin, when we went to Berlin and everyone was sitting around the table, we agreed that we would try to de-escalate this. We agreed that the arms embargo should be enforced. And you're calling this a proxy war between the Russians and the Turks. You're leaving out the United Arab Emirates, you're leaving out the Egyptians, you're leaving out the French. There are so many countries here that are violating the arms embargo. This is not just about the Turks and the Russians.
But you're sounding as if you're understanding the Turks a little more than you're accommodating the others. I don't know why I hear you say accommodating the Turks more, although in many parts of the Arab world, there's a huge criticism of Turkey because of it is absolute heavy foot into Libyan territory. David?
They are an interested party in the conflict. They put troops into Syria as well. And maybe some Arabs didn't like that because the Turks went into Syria. I don't have an issue with that. They are protecting their interests. I think they prevented continued slaughter of Syrians by the Assad regime and Russia. So I think that was a good thing, their intervention, personally.
Yeah, fascinating. All right, so now I have a total of 4 minutes, and everyone is going to get 1 minute only to tell me what's on their mind before we conclude this amazing conversation. Ghassan, Hasbani.
If you allow me to use my 1 minute wisely, I would say two things, reverting back to the situation in Lebanon, which is also applicable to a lot of the region. What is a clear destabilizing factor today is the position of Iran, its proxies and allies in the region towards the rest of the region and the world. And this will continue being a destabilizing factor unless dealt with at a faster pace than we are seeing today. So sanctions are doing well. We need to have also a game plan for the end game as well. The second point for Lebanon specifically, as much as the influence of Hezbollah has actually scared off investments and tourism, etc., for the last 10 years, and in many ways protected the corrupt structure that existed in public sector. Corruption is a major issue that needs to be driven by the international community, or the solution of which needs to also be encouraged and driven by the international community that is looking to support Lebanon in its current economic cycle. These are the two major factors for us.
Thank you very much, Ghassan Hasbani. Philipp Ackermann, 1 minute, please.
Very briefly, I think what we see here is a region that really deteriorates rather than improves, and therefore we need more international engagement. And I see the UN in the lead, but I see also regional fora like the League of Arab States, like the European Union, like the African Union. They have a very big role to play in order to solve the conflicts in a peaceful, non-military manner. And I think we have to spend more time and more efforts in succeeding.
Thank you very much, Philipp Ackermann. Hossam Zaki? Your 1 minute, please. Hossam Zaki?
I don't know, I have a problem in my connection. I don't know if you will be able to hear me correctly.
We can hear you. Go ahead. We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, go ahead, Hossam Zaki. We can hear you. Just speak if you don't mind. Hossam? All right. I'm going to go to...
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead. You lost 20 seconds. Go ahead. You have 1 minute.
Sorry. Two things. Annexation is a really big problem that's going to come out if the Israelis decide to go their way. So we need to be very, very alarmed about this.
Absolutely. Secondly,
what they're doing is. Secondly, somebody has to rein in the Turks. The Turks' actions in the region are really negative, and it's going to bring the whole region into chaos very shortly.
Thank you very much, Hossam Zaki. David Schenker, 1 minute, please.
Well, Raghida, thanks for hosting us. It's a pleasure to see some old friends. Didn't see Philipp initially, but Hossam and Ghassan, please call me anytime. We've got a lot of problems. We're going to work through them. Secretary of State is engaged, and we'll keep on fighting the good fight.
We hope it's the good fight, David Schenker. And thank you all for joining me. It's always gratifying at the end of the session to hear so many different views and to differ openly. And next week, we will have yet another wonderful discussion. It's going to be E-Policy Circle number 5 of Beirut Institute Summit in Abu Dhabi. Hopefully, it's going to be in March. That's why in 2021, and we're doing sort of we're preparing for it through these E-Policy Circles. Next week, we have Ambassador Robert Blackwell. You all know who he is. And we have Jihad Azrouf from the IMF. We have Kishore Mahboubani, who wrote Has China Won? And I think it's going to be a great debate between him and Robert Blackwell. And then we have Andrei Bistrisky from the Valdai Discussion Club in Moscow. Thank you for joining me. I'm Raghida Dergham, and have a wonderful evening, morning, rest of the day. Enjoy it, and I'm grateful that you joined me today. Thank you all very much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.